Do you think it got so much worse because you accomplished so many things and your drive just increased with the amount of success that you had and the different things you accomplished in your life, whereas when you were younger, it was almost like you experience fuck ups and success, whereas as you've gotten older, when a fuck up does happen, it's just so infuriating because you should be past it?
That's a good question. That might be the case. My thinking is a little bit different, which is there's an addiction at play here, right? So if you shift the thinking of this to that of addiction mindset, and it's hard to sometimes think of perfectionism as an addiction because it doesn't produce immediately the same negative consequences as the addictions to, alcohol, drugs, and gambling, and sort of the less socially acceptable addictions. But I think what happens with most people who are addicted to something is their appetite for that addiction gets higher and higher. And so, if you're addicted to alcohol, like an alcoholic habituates to a certain amount of alcohol, they have to drink more and more and more. And similarly, the need for achievement grew more and more and more. And one of my therapists explained this to me so well, and I was like, that is the most frightening, brilliant analogy I've ever heard. She said, your entire self-esteem is based on performance. And anytime you turn to one of your performance, addictions and you don't get performance back, you lose your mind, right? So everything you have to do feeds your sense of self-worth. So if you go out and shoot the bow, it's got to be great. If you go out and drive the car or get in the simulator, it's got to be great. If you're trying to, prepare for a podcast, it's got to be great. Like all of these things, you have to be great. And when you don't, it's sort of like an alcoholic who walks into a bar, asks for vodka and gets water, right? They're asking for vodka. They need the thing that feeds their addiction, but they're being given water instead. So I'm demanding great performance because that's how I validate my existence, and instead I get no performance. I get lousy performance. But because my appetite has grown, it gets hard. That's why I think over time it just got worse and worse.
So what did you do to correct that?
Well, I think there's two things, right? There's the underlying belief system has to be completely shattered, right? So that's, I spent total of 5 weeks in residential care, 2 weeks in 2017 and 3 weeks in 2020. So that's as bad as it gets, right? You're doing 12 to 13 hours a day of therapy, 7 days a week. And that's where you're kind of going back to the root of the problems. Like, what is it that is creating or has created this belief system in you? So you have to go back and look at that. You then have to figure out what are the strategies and tools to break these habits and behaviors. And so to the latter, there was a very tangible tool put forth by one of the therapists, which was every time you do something that creates this ire and rage in you, instead of defaulting into your normal state, which is yelling at yourself or breaking an arrow over your thigh or whatever it is you would do, pull out your phone and audibly speak as though it's your friend that made that mistake, right? So if I'm shooting horribly and I really feel like I'm going to lose my mind, I pull out my phone and I pretend it's you that's shooting horribly. What would I say to you? I wouldn't yell at you if you're shooting poorly. I'd be like, Joe, look, man, it's a little windy today. Let's be honest. We're not making excuses, but when it's 20-mile-an-hour wind, it's hard to shoot well. Maybe you're tired, you probably just lifted right before you came out here. That always makes it harder for you to stabilize the bow. And look, maybe it's just a bad day. Like, let's come out and do it again tomorrow. And so I would record that and I would send that to my therapist every single time. And this would happen like multiple times a day. And just doing that 4 or 5 times a day, after 4, 5, 6 months, what I called my inner Bobby Knight, which was the name I had for that guy that would scream at me, like I just couldn't hear him anymore.
Wow, that's fascinating. So you fixed a lifelong problem in just a few months.
Which, if you had told me up front that was possible, I would have said, it's not. You can't. I was like, there's no way you can undo something so, I thought, so terminal. But, this speaks to plasticity, right? The brain is a pretty plastic thing.
It's interesting to think of what what started you on this path and why you didn't course correct. I love this thought process that it's an addiction and you're addicted to great performance, which totally makes sense. Totally makes sense. Because I could feel myself, I definitely could have succumbed to that same sort of thinking and behavior.
And it is a dangerous addiction. Perfectionism is a dangerous addiction in the sense that a lot of people will reward it. Society generally rewards it.
Yeah.
And in that sense, another fear I had was, because I mean, it's not like people around me didn't know I was a mess. But anytime someone tried to suggest, like, back off, I would look at them and say, are you an idiot? Like, if I back off, I won't be as good. Like, if I don't, like when I was in residency, I had this obsession with wanting to read every single textbook written in surgery. And, we're already working like 114 hours a week. It's not like I had a lot of free time. And my wife was like, you're so dogmatic in this. Like, you insist on reading 26 pages of tiny fonted textbooks every day. And she's like, why? Like, you don't need to do this. And I was like, are you kidding? Like, of course I need to do this. Like, what else will my legacy be if I don't do this? I mean, it's just like this very polluted sense of self-worth. But again, it's rewarded because then you know a lot, right? And so people are happy with how much you know. So it feeds on itself in a very destructive way. There's nobody that's looking at the guy who's losing all his money gambling and saying, good job, like, keep doing that.